Dawn had not yet claimed the sky when Helen sensed the shift beside her. It wasn't sound that woke her, not footsteps, not the whisper of fabric, not even the familiar creak of their aging house. It was Gerald's breathing, tight, controlled, uneven in a way that betrayed nerves he believed he'd mastered. Helen remained perfectly still. Years of marriage had trained her to recognize these moments without opening her eyes. Gerald moved differently when he was hiding something. His body stiffened, his breath shortened. He became careful in a way that suggested guilt rather than kindness. If this story touched your heart, friends, please like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more touching stories. Thank you for being here. She felt the cool stretch of sheets beside her where his warmth had been moments earlier. The absence registered immediately, but it didn't sting. It settled, heavy and expected. Behind her, Gerald dressed quickly. He had prepared in advance, clothes laid out, shoes positioned, jacket draped over the chair like a silent promise to himself. He didn't turn on the light. He didn't glance back. He moved with the confidence of someone who believed he was finally escaping a life that had inconvenienced him. Helen's face didn't change. The suitcase came next, old, scuffed, overstuffed. It scraped softly against the floor as he lifted it, muttering under his breath. Then the bedroom door closed, slow and deliberate, followed by the hushed sounds of his exit through the hallway. Moments later, the front door shut. The house exhaled. Only then did Helen open her eyes. The room lay in a dim wash of blue-gray light, the kind Portland specializes in, quiet, unresolved, suspended between night and morning. She rose from the bed without urgency, crossing the hardwood floor like someone completing a long-anticipated task. At the window, she parted the curtains. Gerald's SUV waited under a flickering street lamp, rain beginning to speckle its surface. She watched as he emerged from the porch shadows, hauling the suitcase toward the back seat. He didn't look up, not once, not at the house, not at the life he was leaving behind. The engine started, the car pulled away. Helen folded her arms loosely across her chest. There were no tears, no shaking breath, just a quiet, hollow calm that wrapped itself around her like fog. She stayed there long after the street was empty. Half an hour later, her phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. She already knew who it was. Helen walked over, lifted the phone, and unlocked the screen. A photograph filled it instantly. Gerald sat on a plane, smiling too widely, his face tilted toward a young woman pressed against him. Rachel Torres, his assistant, barely out of her 20s. Her expression carried the smug certainty of someone who believed she'd won something valuable. Below the image was a message. "Goodbye, Helen. I'm leaving you with nothing." Helen stared at the words, letting the silence stretch. Then, slowly, something shifted. The faintest curve appeared at the corner of her mouth. Not humor, not pain, but recognition. Cold, precise, dangerous. Because Gerald Pierce was already too late. 15 minutes before he zipped that suitcase, before he rehearsed his exit, before he congratulated himself on his cleverness, Helen had made a phone call of her own. Quiet, calculated, final. The photo hadn't shattered her. It confirmed her timing. Days earlier, she had noticed the signs, a scent on his coat that wasn't hers, receipts for dinners he never invited her to, late nights explained vaguely, defensively. She hadn't confronted him, she hadn't cried, she had waited. And one evening, while Gerald showered, Helen picked up his phone. What she found didn't shock her. It clarified everything. Messages, photos, voice notes dripping with affection meant for someone else, and threaded through them plans, financial, deliberate, cruel. Promises to drain accounts, to disappear, to leave her stranded. Helen read every word. Then she acted. As she set her phone down now, the kitchen quiet around her, Helen knew one thing with absolute certainty. Gerald believed he had just ended her life. What he didn't realize until it was far too late was that he had just triggered the beginning of his own collapse, and the next call she made would make sure of it. The kitchen clock clicked softly as Helen set her phone face down on the counter. Gerald's message still glowed in her mind, not because it hurt, but because it revealed how badly he misunderstood her. He believed cruelty still had power. He believed fear lingered. It didn't. She poured hot water into her mug and watched steam rise, slow and deliberate. The house felt different now, not empty, not lonely, but alert, as if the walls themselves were paying attention. Helen moved to the dining table and opened her laptop. Her inbox was already filling. Samuel Whitmore had been busy. Account transfers completed. Ownership documentation filed. Business credit lines frozen pending review. She read each line carefully, her pulse steady. Gerald had always been the loud one, the man who believed control came from asserting dominance. Helen had learned, quietly, that real control came from preparation. Her phone buzzed again. A call this time. She didn't need to check the name. She already knew. Helen let it ring. Then silence returned. She carried her tea to the living room and sat near the window. Outside, Portland moved on, cars gliding through damp streets, pedestrians hunched under umbrellas, the city breathing the way it always had. Life didn't stop just because one man's plans had collapsed. She allowed herself one memory, not of the affair, not of the message, but of the early years, before Gerald's confidence curdled into contempt. Back when they'd worked side by side, sanding rough edges, sketching ideas late into the night. She had been part of the foundation, not an accessory, not a shadow. Somewhere along the way, he'd rewritten that history, and she had let him. Helen stood abruptly, the chair legs scraping softly against the floor. Regret was useless now. Action wasn't. She walked down the hallway and stopped outside the office Gerald had always claimed as his own. The door stood slightly ajar, as if even it no longer respected his authority. Helen pushed it open. The room smelled stale, old coffee, paper, ego. She crossed to the desk and surveyed the chaos, receipts stuffed into drawers, ledgers half-filled, sticky notes layered with half-formed ideas and broken promises. Gerald liked to call this space his command center. To Helen, it looked like panic disguised as confidence. She opened the planner lying at the center of the desk. Tomorrow's date was circled in thick red ink. A client meeting. A big one. Helen's eyes narrowed slightly. Gerald had planned to attend that meeting as if nothing were wrong, as if betrayal didn't bleed into business, as if charm could patch over incompetence. She closed the planner. Then she picked up her phone and dialed. "Pickering and Sums Construction?" a gruff voice answered. "Mr. Pickering," Helen said evenly. "This is Helen Pierce." There was a pause. "I wasn't expecting your call." "I imagine not. I'm calling about tomorrow's meeting." Another pause, heavier this time. "Gerald canceling again?" "No, he won't be attending. I will." Silence stretched across the line. "I'm the sole owner of Pierce Woodcrafts as of this morning. All contracts, finances, and decisions now come through me." The exhale on the other end sounded almost relieved. "About time," Pickering muttered. "If I'm honest, we were close to walking away. You won't need to. The work will be delivered, on time and transparently." A beat, then, "All right, Mrs. Pierce, I'll see you tomorrow." When the call ended, Helen stood motionless, phone still pressed to her ear. The shift wasn't symbolic anymore. It was real, audible, documented. Her phone vibrated again, multiple times in quick succession. Gerald. She blocked the number without hesitation. Moments later, another call came through, a different name. "Mom?" Chloe's voice trembled. "Dad just called me. He said you took everything." Helen closed her eyes, steadying herself. This was the ripple Samuel had warned her about. "Chloe," she said gently, "your father is scared and scared people lie." There was silence. Then softly, "Tell me the truth." So Helen did. She didn't embellish. She didn't protect Gerald's image anymore. She told her daughter about the affair, the money, the plan to disappear, about the phone call she made before he ever left the house. When Chloe spoke again, her voice was different, clear, firm. "I'm coming over." After the call ended, Helen looked around the house once more. The quiet no longer felt fragile. It felt like the calm before something solid was built. And somewhere far away, Gerald was just beginning to understand that this story was no longer his to control. Because the next move wouldn't be about survival. It would be about reckoning. Chloe arrived just before dusk, rain clinging to her coat, eyes sharp with a mix of worry and resolve. She didn't hesitate at the doorway. She stepped inside like someone reclaiming familiar ground, dropping her bag by the wall and pulling Helen into a tight embrace. "I'm not leaving you alone tonight," she said quietly. Helen nodded, her throat tightening, not with sadness, but relief. They moved through the house together, not speaking much at first. Chloe noticed the subtle changes immediately. Gerald's shoes missing from the rack, the office door open, the framed photos gone from the hallway. The absence spoke louder than arguments ever had. Finally, Chloe broke the silence. "How long has this been happening?" Helen took a moment before answering. "Longer than I admitted. To myself, too." They sat at the kitchen table, mugs warming their hands. The rain tapped steadily against the windows, a soft, insistent rhythm. Helen didn't rush this conversation. She had learned that truth, when delivered calmly, carried more weight than emotion ever could. She told Chloe about the years of small dismissals, how they added up, how Gerald never raised his voice, never needed to, how control came wrapped in jokes, sighs, and quiet corrections, how she had slowly adjusted herself to fit the version of a wife he found least inconvenient. "I thought if I stayed reasonable, if I stayed useful, things would level out. I didn't realize I was shrinking." Chloe's jaw tightened. "You weren't shrinking. He was erasing you." The words landed with unexpected force. Helen exhaled. "I let it happen." Chloe reached across the table and took her hand. "You survived it. There's a difference." Later, they worked side by side, sorting through what remained of Gerald's presence, not angrily, methodically. Shirts folded into bags, old paperwork boxed for Samuel, items for donation stacked neatly by the door. It felt less like destruction and more like editing, removing what no longer belonged in the story. In the garage, Chloe paused beside a box of Gerald's old tools. "Are you sure you want to keep these?" Helen considered it, then shook her head. "No, they remind me of work I did alone." They left the box behind. As evening settled, Chloe's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, then stiffened. It's him, a different number. Helen didn't react. "You don't have to answer." Chloe hesitated, then answered anyway, stepping a few feet away. Helen heard Gerald's voice faintly through the speaker, sharp and frantic. The tone was unfamiliar, smaller. Chloe listened without interrupting. "No," she said finally. "You don't get to blame Mom for cleaning up your mess." A pause. "No, I'm not talking to her for you, and stop saying you were forced. You planned this." Another pause, longer. Then quietly but firmly, "Don't call me again." She ended the call and turned back, eyes blazing, not with confusion, but certainty. "I believe you, all of it." That night, after Chloe left for home, Helen stood alone in the living room. The house no longer echoed with Gerald's moods. The silence wasn't tense, it was spacious. Her phone buzzed once more, a voicemail notification. She deleted it without listening. Across the ocean, under fluorescent airport lights, Gerald paced near a departure gate that no longer had his name on a ticket. His cards had all been declined. His assistant, now ex-assistant, sat several seats away, scrolling her phone with visible irritation. "What did you do?" she snapped. "Nothing," Gerald said too quickly. "This is temporary." She laughed, sharp and humorless. Temporary men don't lie like this. When the boarding call echoed for another flight, one he wasn't on, Rachel stood abruptly. "I'm not staying. Figure your life out." She walked away without looking back. Gerald sank into a plastic chair, sweat beading at his hairline. He dialed again. Helen. Blocked.
Chloe, declined. Samuel, voicemail. For the first time, there was nowhere left to push responsibility. Back in Portland, Helen closed the curtains and turned off the lights. She climbed into bed alone, but not abandoned. Her body felt tired in a good way, the kind of exhaustion that follows hard truth and necessary decisions. As she drifted toward sleep, one thought settled clearly in her mind. Silence had cost her years, but breaking it had given her something far more valuable than revenge: control. And tomorrow she would face the world not as someone recovering, but as someone rebuilding.
Morning arrived without ceremony. No alarms, no raised voices, no tension lingering in the air. Ellen woke before her alarm anyway, her mind already alert. Today mattered. She stood in front of the bathroom mirror longer than usual, studying her reflection, not critically, not anxiously, but thoughtfully. The woman staring back at her looked steadier than she had in years. The silver strands in her hair caught the light instead of hiding from it. She didn't reach for makeup right away. She didn't need armor today. In the kitchen, she brewed coffee and reviewed her notes one final time. Numbers, timelines, commitments. Facts were her ally. Gerald had relied on charm and intimidation. Helen relied on preparation. By the time she stepped into her car, Portland's streets were alive with movement. Rain slicked the pavement, reflecting traffic lights like scattered jewels. The city felt awake, grounded, indifferent to personal drama. That indifference steadied her. The conference room at Pickering & Sons smelled faintly of wood polish and fresh paper. Art Pickering stood when Helen entered, surprise flickering across his face before settling into approval. "Mrs. Pierce," he said, extending a hand. "Helen," she corrected gently. They sat across from each other, contracts laid out neatly between them. No Gerald, no interruptions, no condescension. Helen spoke clearly, without rushing. She acknowledged the delays, the financial instability, the broken trust. She didn't deflect blame, but she didn't shoulder responsibility that wasn't hers either. "Those failures stop now," she said. "Here's how." She walked him through her plan: restructured timelines, transparent invoicing, vendor accountability, and oversight she would personally manage. She answered questions directly. When she didn't know something, she said so, and explained how she would find out. By the time the meeting ended, Art leaned back in his chair, nodding slowly. "You should have been running this years ago," he said. Helen smiled, not with pride, but with quiet certainty. "I am now." The contract was signed. Outside, Helen paused on the sidewalk, letting the moment sink in. This wasn't validation from a man. It was proof to herself that she hadn't imagined her own competence. Her phone buzzed as she reached her car. Samuel. The bank flagged another transfer Gerald attempted after he left. Helen closed her eyes briefly. Did it go through? No, and the lender wants answers. Then give them the truth, all of it. That afternoon, Helen returned home to find the house bathed in sunlight for once, the clouds temporarily lifted. She opened windows, letting fresh air rush through rooms that had held too many unsaid things. A knock came at the door. 2 people stood on the porch, a man in a suit, a woman with a folder. "Mrs. Pierce," the man said. "We're here regarding Gerald Pierce." Helen nodded calmly. "I expected you." She answered every question, provided documentation, offered timelines. Not defensively, but confidently. She didn't protect Gerald. She didn't attack him either. She told the truth and let it stand on its own. When they left, the house felt lighter still. That evening, Chloe called. "He tried again," she said. "I didn't answer." "You don't have to," Helen said softly. "I know. I just wanted you to know I'm proud of you." Helen closed her eyes, emotion rising unexpectedly. "That means more than you realize." As night settled, Helen sat at the dining table, updating her planner. New client calls, vendor meetings. One line caught her attention. "Look at apartments." She circled it. The house had served its purpose, but it wasn't her future. Upstairs, she packed a small box with items that mattered. Books she loved, photos of herself before compromise became routine, and a notebook filled with old ideas she'd once abandoned. She didn't rush. She wasn't escaping. She was choosing. Before bed, she checked her phone one last time. No messages she needed, no voices demanding space in her head. She turned off the light and lay down, feeling the weight of the day settle, not as exhaustion, but as accomplishment. Helen had spoken for herself today, and the world had listened.
but the consequences, legal, emotional, irreversible, were only beginning to surface.
The first official notice arrived on a Thursday morning, folded neatly into a plain white envelope that blended too easily with the rest of the mail. Helen didn't open it right away. She recognized the return address, legal offices downtown, and set it aside on the counter while she finished her coffee. She had learned something important over the past week. Urgency no longer belonged to other people. When she finally opened the envelope, she read slowly, carefully. Gerald had filed a formal dispute claiming wrongful removal from the company, financial manipulation, and emotional coercion. The language was dramatic, inflated, familiar. Helen exhaled, not in fear but recognition. Samuel confirmed it an hour later. "It's weak," he said, "and desperate." "That tracks," Helen replied. The dispute didn't derail her day. She attended meetings, answered emails, and reviewed supply contracts. The work grounded her. Reality had weight, unlike Gerald's accusations, which floated on entitlement and assumption. That afternoon, she visited the Pearl District with a real estate agent. The apartment she toured was smaller than her house, filled with light, overlooking a tree-lined street. It felt intentional, temporary in the best way. "I'll think about it," Helen said, already knowing the answer. On her way home, her phone rang, an unfamiliar number. She answered. "Mrs. Pierce?" a voice said cautiously. "This is Gerald's attorney?" Helen's grip tightened, but only slightly. "You may speak." The man launched into a carefully structured argument about shared assets, marital contribution, and emotional distress. Helen listened without interruption. When he finished, she spoke calmly. "All communications regarding finances should go through my counsel," she said. "And for the record, Gerald's access was revoked due to documented financial misconduct. You have those records." Silence. "I suggest you review them," Helen added, "closely." The call ended quickly. That night, Chloe came over with takeout and wine. They ate on the floor, laughing softly at nothing in particular. "Do you feel bad?" Chloe asked suddenly. Helen considered it. "I feel done." Across the ocean, Gerald stared at another rejected claim. His anger had nowhere to land now. The systems he'd relied on, money, manipulation, noise, had stopped responding. For the first time, he was facing a wall that didn't move. And Helen? She slept peacefully, knowing the past had finally arrived and found no power left, because the next stage wouldn't be about defending herself. It would be about closing the door for good. The apartment lease was signed on a Monday morning. Helen didn't celebrate. She didn't announce it. She folded the paperwork into her bag and walked the few blocks back to her car, letting the reality settle at its own pace. This wasn't an escape. It was a transition. Clean, deliberate, and overdue. The Pearl District apartment smelled faintly of fresh paint and new wood. Sunlight poured through tall windows, stretching across the empty floor like an invitation. Helen stood in the center of the living room, hands on her hips, taking it all in. Smaller space, fewer echoes, less room for ghosts. She liked that. Back at the house, she began packing slowly. Not everything, just what mattered. Each box was labeled with care, not because she was sentimental, but because she respected the life she was building enough to organize it properly. Books first, then kitchenware, then personal items she hadn't touched in years because Gerald found them unnecessary. Old sketch pads, handwritten plans, a camera she once loved. Midway through the afternoon, Samuel called. "They've escalated," he said. "Gerald is pushing for an emergency injunction." Helen closed the box she was working on. "On what grounds?" "Claiming emotional instability on your part." She laughed once, short and dry. "Of course he is." Samuel sighed. "It won't stick, but it means a hearing." "Then we prepare," Helen said simply. The hearing was scheduled for Friday. On Wednesday, Chloe helped her move the first load into the apartment. They worked quietly, efficiently, stopping only once when Chloe found an old notebook.
"You wrote all this?" she asked, flipping through pages of ideas and sketches. Helen smiled faintly. "Before I convinced myself I didn't have time." Chloe handed it back. "Don't lose it again." Friday arrived with gray skies and a courtroom that smelled of old paper and polished wood. Gerald sat across the aisle, thinner, sharper, eyes darting toward Helen as if searching for a crack. He found none. Helen spoke when asked, calm, factual, supported by documents, timelines, signatures. Gerald interrupted twice. Both times the judge silenced him. When it was over, the ruling was clear. No injunction, no shared control, no sympathy for misrepresentation. Outside, Gerald called after her. "You think you've won?" Helen turned for the first time. "I think I'm finished," she said. That night, she slept in the apartment for the first time. The city hummed outside, alive and anonymous. She lay on the mattress, staring at the ceiling, feeling the unfamiliar comfort of a life that finally fit. The weight of what remained wasn't fear, it was freedom learning how to breathe. And the final chapter, personal, public, and irreversible, was waiting.
The article went live on a Tuesday morning. Helen hadn't planned it that way, but timing had a way of aligning once she stopped fighting it. The local business journal published a short feature about Pierce Woodcraft's new leadership, restructuring, renewed client confidence. Her name appeared in clean black letters beneath the headline. No scandal, no bitterness, just facts. Helen read it once, then closed the tab. By noon, her phone began to ring. Vendors, former partners, even people who had quietly distanced themselves during Gerald's final months. The tone was the same across every conversation, curious, respectful, cautiously optimistic. "Good to see things stabilizing," one supplier said. "They already have," Helen replied. That afternoon, Samuel called with an update. "The exposure changes things. Gerald's attorney just requested mediation." Helen wasn't surprised. Reputation had always been Gerald's shield. Without it, he had nothing left to leverage. "Do we attend?" Samuel asked. "Yes," Helen said, "but on my terms." The mediation room was smaller than the courtroom, neutral, designed to calm egos and soften conflict. Gerald sat stiffly across the table, his confidence reduced to brittle posture and rehearsed outrage. He spoke first. "You didn't have to humiliate me," he said. Helen met his eyes. "I didn't mention you at all." The mediator shifted uncomfortably. Gerald leaned forward. "You took my life." Helen's voice didn't rise. "You abandoned it." Silence followed. Thick. Final. The settlement was brief. Gerald relinquished all claims in exchange for debt protection and a non-disclosure agreement, one that protected the business, not him. He signed with a shaking hand. When it was done, Helen stood, gathered her folder, and turned to leave. Gerald called after her, softer now. "Was I ever enough?" Helen paused but didn't turn. "You never asked," she said. Outside, the air felt cleaner, lighter. That evening, Helen hosted her first team meeting. Small group, new energy, clear expectations. She spoke openly about accountability, transparency, and mutual respect. No one interrupted her. Later, alone in her apartment, she poured a glass of wine and sat by the window. The city lights flickered like distant stars. She thought of the woman she had been, quiet, accommodating, afraid of disruption. She smiled gently. Disruption had saved her. And tomorrow, the final decision, about the future, not the past, would be hers alone. The morning after mediation arrived quietly, without urgency or demand. No legal notices, no frantic calls, no echoes of Gerald's voice lingering in Helen's thoughts. Just light filtering through the tall apartment windows and the muted hum of the city waking up below. Helen sat on the floor with her back against the couch, coffee warming her hands, laptop open but untouched. For the first time in weeks, there was nothing she had to do. That realization felt heavier than any crisis. When survival is no longer the priority, choice steps in, and choice requires honesty. She thought about the business first. Pierce Woodcrafts was stable now,
contracts secured, debts contained, leadership respected. She could grow it aggressively, chase expansion, prove something to people who once doubted her. The opportunity was there. But proving herself no longer appealed to her. What appealed to her was sustainability, balance, work that didn't require erasing herself to succeed. She opened a fresh document and began outlining a different vision: fewer high-pressure contracts, more selective partnerships, a focus on craftsmanship rather than scale, a business that fit her life instead of consuming it. Her phone buzzed. "Chloe." "Breakfast?" her daughter asked. "My treat." They met at a small cafe near the river, sunlight spilling across wooden tables, the air smelling of bread and citrus. Chloe studied her mother carefully over her mug. "You look lighter," she said. "I feel clearer," Helen replied. They talked, not about Gerald, not about courtrooms, but about travel, about ideas Helen once shelved, about things Chloe wanted to try now that she wasn't constantly bracing herself against family tension. "You know," Chloe said thoughtfully, "you don't owe anyone a big ending." Helen smiled. "I know." That afternoon, Helen walked alone through a nearby park, leaves crunching underfoot, children laughing somewhere in the distance. She watched a woman sketching on a bench, entirely absorbed in her work. The sight stirred something familiar. At home, Helen unpacked the old camera Chloe had found. She charged a battery, adjusted the settings, and stepped back onto the street. She didn't aim for perfection, just moments. Light on brick, rain on glass, a woman laughing into her phone. Creation without permission. That evening, Samuel called one last time. "Everything's finalized," he said. "You're officially clear. No loose ends." "Thank you," for more than the paperwork. After the call, Helen stood at the window again, camera resting on the sill, city lights reflecting back at her. She realized something then. Closure wasn't loud. It didn't demand witnesses. It was simply the absence of resistance. Helen wasn't rebuilding out of ruin anymore. She was building from intention. And as night settled over Portland, one truth became undeniable. Her story no longer revolved around what she survived. It revolved around what she chose. And the final chapter wouldn't be about reclaiming her life. It would be about living it.
A year later, the city felt different to Helen. Not because Portland had changed, but because she had. Morning light spilled across the hardwood floor of her apartment as she adjusted the strap of her camera and checked the time. She had nowhere urgent to be, which was exactly the point. The calendar on her wall wasn't crowded anymore. Meetings were spaced with intention. Silence had a place. Pierce Woodcrafts still existed, but it no longer demanded her every breath. The company had found its rhythm under her leadership: smaller contracts, loyal clients, consistent work. She had hired people who respected process and collaboration, not noise. The chaos Gerald left behind had long since settled into something steady and dependable. Helen poured herself coffee and opened a window. The city greeted her with distant traffic, footsteps, and the low hum of life continuing at its own pace. She didn't brace herself for the day. She welcomed it. Her phone buzzed with a message from Chloe. "Gallery opens at 6. Don't be late." Helen smiled. The gallery space sat tucked between a bookstore and a cafe, warm light spilling onto the sidewalk. Inside, framed photographs lined the walls, moments Helen had captured over months of wandering. Hands shaped in wood, rain-soaked streets, quiet faces caught mid-thought. None of them were perfect. All of them were honest. Chloe found her near the back, eyes shining. "You did this." "We did," Helen corrected gently. People moved through the room slowly, thoughtfully. Some paused longer at certain pieces. One man asked about technique. A woman asked about perspective. No one asked about her past, and she didn't offer it. Later, as the crowd thinned, Helen stepped outside. The evening air was cool, familiar. She leaned against the brick wall and let the moment settle. There was no dramatic triumph, no revenge fulfilled, no need to look back.
She had kept the most important thing, the right to decide who she became next. Helen took one last photograph as the streetlights flickered on. It wasn't of the city, it was of herself, reflected faintly in the glass, steady, present, unafraid. Because in the end, she didn't win by taking anything from him, she won by keeping herself.